thank you so much for joining us today. So this session is a chance to hear directly from two of our Artsmark assessors, and we have Sam Cairns and David Parker with us, and they're going to be sharing some insights, reflections, and some examples from practice and the statements of impact that they've been assessing, and also their assessment processes. So whether you're just starting your Artsmark journey or you're a little bit further along, maybe you're second or third, we hope this conversation really brings some sort of transparency to the assessment process. And we'll begin with Sam and David, who can initially share their thoughts, and then we're going to have some ample time for questions, which will be in an open Q&A. So now I'm going to hand over to Sam and David, who can introduce themselves more fully and to share their insights and any guidance and advice they have.
Do you want me to introduce myself first, David, and then? Okay.
Sounds good. Go ahead.
Hi everyone. It's lovely to be here and to and a chance to sort of chat to you about this. I'm in awe of Artsmark teachers and the work that you do, and also the impact that I read about in the statements. It's just incredible what you do for the children, young people, and students that you work with. So thank you. I'm Sam Cairns. I've been an assessor for 10 years now. And I work in arts and cultural education. I spend a lot of time thinking about how do we create the structures to make sure that every child gets access to an arts-rich education. So I work on a number of other projects as well as being an Artsmark assessor, which may come up as we talk through the questions, but I'll hand over to David and come back again in a while.
Thank you, Sam. And good morning to everybody. I hope you can all hear me okay. Jump up and down and look annoyed if you can't. Good. Lovely to be with you, and lovely to see so many of you participating. So to follow on from Sam, I'm David Parker. I've also been an Artsmark assessor for the same period of time, about 10 years. Both Sam and I got involved in Artsmark about 10 years ago because, as some of you may remember or know from your past associations with Artsmark, around 10 years ago, Artsmark changed in terms of its processes and its framework, what it was aiming to do and how it set its stall out. And we'll touch on some of those processes as we go through explaining what we do as assessors. But I thought it would be useful just to begin by giving you a sense of what that kind of step change was back in 2015, because it helps set the scene for what we do as assessors and what we're looking for from you when you send us your written submissions. So originally, Artsmark began over 20 years ago now, I think, and maybe 25 years ago. At that time, it was more of an audit of the volume of activity that you submitted as schools. So you would sort of tot up the volume of amount of dance and drama and music and so forth that you did. And it would be accompanied by a school-based visit by an assessor who would come out and kind of get a feel for the context of your school and how the arts played out in your curriculum and your strategies. In 2015, Arts Council took the decision to change Artsmark, and so it's become something that is less about auditing the amount of what you do and much more a process that aligns with what you might think of as your school improvement plans or your forward-thinking strategies that take you into the medium and long term. And the reason for doing that was we felt that it would be better for Artsmark to interweave with such strategies and give the arts a chance to really sustain and cement themselves in the lives of each of your schools. So that was the thinking behind it. But what that meant was a different process emerged. And the process now is much more narrative based. You'll be aware that you submit two key documents through to us as assessors. The first is a statement of commitment. The second is a statement of impact. And we'll come on to talk about what we do with them when we receive them in a little while. The key thing to keep in mind about the two documents that we get is that they really are the only documents that we refer to. And this is very important to understand. So a lot of teachers often may assume that we have access to prior submissions if you're on 2, 3, 4 times an Artsmark cycle of activity, we won't necessarily look back at what you've done before. We'll just look at the paperwork that you've submitted for this cycle. We won't look at your websites. We won't look at any Ofsted reports. We won't look at any kind of word of mouth reputation that's sort of circulating about school in relation to the arts or cultural activities it participates in. So it's very important that you keep in mind that those 2 documents are really your space to give us everything that we will refer to in determining the kind of level of award when it comes to arts. So these 2 documents, when they come through to us, this is where each of us as assessors have a framework that we adhere to, and hopefully this never worked very well in terms of showing you the detail, but hopefully you're familiar with that kind of visual representation of the Artsmark framework. There are 8 key criteria that's downloadable from the Artsmark website in amongst all the other paraphernalia and documents that are available there. That is a quick and easy way of accessing the 8 criteria that form the basis of our assessment of your submission. So there are 6 questions that you answer in your statement of commitment. There are 6 questions that you will answer in your statement of impact. And in relation to all of those questions, all 12 of them, we as assessors are reading them off against those 8 criteria. Those 8 criteria, as you probably know, are values and ethos, leadership, children and young people, curriculum design and delivery, range of offer, cultural collaborations, EDI, equality, diversity and inclusion, and CPD. So those are the 8 elements that we're looking for woven into your narratives when you submit a statement of commitment and a statement of impact. And for each of those criteria, what I do when I receive them is I'm considering what's the concrete evidence provided for each of those criteria. Overall, is the reading that I'm taking from these narratives an account of embedded practice, or is it more a series of event-based activities where you're trying to get things off the ground and you're exploring new possibilities? But some of those may go somewhere, some of them may not. What's the kind of, where is the emphasis in your narrative when it comes to those 2 things? I'm always looking for whether impact is demonstrated or whether it's just asserted. And of course, all points between those 2 extremes on a spectrum. And what we're really looking for most of the time, wherever possible, is to have assertions backed up with forms of evidence. And we'll come on to talk about what that might look like later on. I'm looking for whether the practice appears to be sustainable beyond one individual. So are you a lone person in a school trying to get something off the ground and seeking to bring your colleagues on board? Are they already on board and helping you get this thing rolling? Or is it already firmly established and you're now trying to raise the bar when it comes to the quality of your practice? So these are the sorts of questions that are swimming around in terms of practice and sustainability of it. We also look out for whether there's coherence across different age phases, across different subjects and across different staffing groups, particularly in secondary schools where there can be a tendency more to work in a siloed way. And we're also looking in your narratives for whether there's a sense of progression over time. Are you sort of cycling around and in a kind of maintenance cycle, keeping the things that you do that work well charged up and working effectively, or are you looking to break new ground and make progress in new directions? So these are some of the big questions that I certainly have swimming around in my head when I'm first making an assessment of your paperwork. I initially do a quick orientation read, a very quick pass, where I just try and answer some of those questions on the fly very quickly. And then what I do is I go back and I look more closely at both of your statement of commitment and statement of impact. But what I do, and not all assessors will do this, is I pair the I pair up the 8 criteria so that I'm working across 4 main groups. And I'll tell you how I do that. So I pair up values and ethos and leadership, because I think when you look at those 2 things together, you get a sense of a school's commitment and capacity to really push the arts and make sure that the arts are embedded over time. I look at curriculum design and delivery and range of offer, because that gives me, when I look at them together, a sense of what you do in curriculum time, but also what you might be doing in terms of enrichment and out of school hours activities like clubs and societies, school trips and things like that. I pair up EDI and children and young people, because together that gives me a very clear sense of how agency, voice and representation play out in your arts offer and the provision that you're building up. And I look at CPD and cultural collaborations together, because that gives me a very good insight into the way you're upskilling yourselves as teachers, and how you reflect and how you share practice, sometimes not just within your setting, but beyond your setting. So when I've done a much closer reading through both of your documents with those different lenses applied, it's a lot easier for me to, in the end, determine a best fit for the level that your school may be at when I get through looking at all of those paired criteria. And when it comes to determining a best fit, and Sam may say more about this, I'm about to hand over to Sam now so she can talk through the process she goes through. We're looking for things like the degree of embeddedness, the depth and coherence of your practice, of course, evidence of impact, and we'll talk about examples of evidence after Sam has walked through her process, the sustainability of your practice, and the extent, particularly if you're a school that's really got a lot of embedded practice and have a track record of working strongly with the arts, the extent to which that practice might now be in a place where you can share it beyond your own setting. And this is particularly relevant for schools that might be seeking a Platinum Award. So I have that quick first pass reading of your documentation. Then I have a much closer reading, zoning in on those 8 criteria grouped together in pairs in a way that works for me. And then we have that best fit consideration at the end, which is really a question of how emergent your practice is, or how embedded it is, or indeed how much you may be sharing it beyond your own setting and influencing other settings. So that's really in a nutshell how I cycle through the process. Sam, you may want to add some flavour and specificity in terms of how you do it.
Yes, so my process is broadly similar to how David approaches it. My background is I used to give out grants. When you're grant making, you're very closely thinking about how you justify any decision, if you need to defend it, if you like where your evidence is. So the way that I do assessments is as David, I read through both the commitment and the statement of impact. And remember, that's the only piece of information I'm allowed to look at. I can't look at anything else. So I read through those 2 pieces, those 2 documents. And at that point, you tend to get a general sense of what level the school is at. So whether it's a silver or a gold or a platinum, or whether you're going to be focusing on whether it's silver or gold or platinum, is what's happening in that first read through. Then I go back and I read for evidence. So I look at each one of the 8 criteria as I read through, and I'm looking for evidence against the different levels within it. So within values and ethos, for example, is there evidence of activity at silver level? Can you prove that you value and promote arts and culture in your setting? If someone challenged me on this, could I prove that I had evidence of that from within the text? So I'm looking for that for each of the 8 criteria. And then I score against those 8. And then again, it is the best fit. So I'm looking for the schools where predominantly, where are their scoring falling? Is it silver, more gold, or is it more platinum? Which one has got the most? I would say most schools tend to have quite a spiky profile. So perhaps there's some particularly strong practice in one area that's at gold level, and then other areas where I can't see any evidence beyond silver. But we're looking for that to figure out which one is the best fit across all of the criteria. I would also say, as well as using the criteria and trying to figure out what evidence means, which level it is, I have read hundreds, I think actually probably thousands of art assessments over the past 10 years. So I'm also comparing against hundreds of other schools I've read to gauge the level of work. And is this the example of this level with that one? Although we are going to talk about the quality assurance process in a sec, so I'm not going to go into that just yet. But the other thing I just wanted to add while I'm talking about this, so I've got my process. I read against each criteria I score. I'm very clear about the evidence that I can pull out, and that should be reflected back to you in your feedback comment when you get that at the end. The evidence which we were using to make this judgment, and the information where we feel like there are areas for improvement as well. That goes in the feedback comment. My bits of advice before I hand back to David. A key thing which always surprises me is not everyone uses the full word count, because we can only look at the statement of commitment and the statement of impact. It's incredibly important that you do use all the words to tell us everything that's going on. That it is incredibly frustrating when you get a submission and you feel like there's a suggestion of really great practice, but they don't talk in any detail about things, or people make statements but then don't back it up with the evidence of this is for example, this is what we are doing. And using all of the word count is important to be able to share all that information for us. The other thing is I feel like when you see schools that haven't taken the 2 full years for their journey, it's again frustrating where you have a school that perhaps has submitted after a year or 18 months. And it feels like if they just waited another 6 months or gone to the full 2 years, they would have had additional evidence of impact, additional detail that might have moved them up a level. So my advice also would be take the full 2 years for the journey, don't submit early. I've got other things, but I feel like I might be jumping around a bit in our narrative flow. David, should we go back and talk about the quality assurance process, and then I can come back in with other advice when I feel it's relevant?
Sure, that makes complete sense. So yeah, just a few words on quality assurance and the review process, just so we're demystifying other aspects of what we do. We've spoken about what we do as individuals. There are some variations, but we're all rooted in the same 8 criteria. We're all applying those. That's the basic lens through which we see everything that you do and value everything that you do. In terms of quality assurance, there are 6 of us that have been doing this for a fair number of years. So there is, in terms of quality assurance, I suppose one thing worth saying is that over 10 years of working together and reading as many submissions as we have, there is a sort of community of practice that just naturally and organically builds up over that time. So that has helped us know that we're on the same page most of the time. But there are always moments where you're not sure, where there's a sort of boundary case or an edge case or whatever it may be. So if there's a sort of atypical submission or something we can't decide over, we will always send those for an additional review. So Sam or I might be the lead reviewer. We might come to a best fit determination, but there's a sort of doubt in our mind, or it may be on the boundary, in which case we would send that to another reviewer to do a paper read through. If they disagree with our initial lead review, it would then be sent to a panel meeting where all 6 of us would meet with Artsmark staff as well, and we would discuss the reasons why we found it difficult to agree. And through that process of discussion, we would then come to a final agreement as to the level of award for that school, that setting. Most of the time, we're able to do this through the paper and online processes. So it's not huge volumes that come to the panel meetings, but it's useful for you to know that that's the process and it's there, so that there is a good degree of scrutiny across the paperwork, and that can go up or up in terms of its intensity as needed. Just a couple of other things just to touch on before we go to questions. So a brief word about what we feel strengthens submissions, and this might lead us into questions where we can go into this in a bit more detail. So what we, as I said, when Artsmark used to be more of an audit process, it was perhaps less important for you to align your intentions up with your eventual outcomes, because essentially back in its original iteration, it was a question of sort of showing that you had a good deal of provision going on in relation to art form subjects. But now we're much more interested in understanding what you see as being the intention behind your mobilization of the arts. It might be that you just need to have a lot more of it going on because it's been an area that's underplayed in your school, in which case we expect to see you flicking lots of new switches on, metaphorically speaking, and it might be a proliferation in after school clubs, it might be lots more trips going on, and this is a great way of getting things started and usually a very positive experience for children. But if you're somewhat further down the road than that, and you're looking to use the arts as an intervention that you hypothesize might have a particular focused outcome on perhaps confidence or disengaged learners or whatever it may be, Artsmark now is set up for you to be able to throw light on that and really explore that. And we're very interested in reading about that. So wherever possible, lining up a sense of intentions with outcomes and impacts always strengthens a submission where you're able to do that. Demonstration of progress, same vein. If you're able to demonstrate that you feel you've taken things on and they've developed and grown in a way that's been interesting and observable and tangible to you, and obviously this depends on you providing some form of evidence to back that up, it's better than giving us a list of isolated examples of things you've done and hoping that they will speak for themselves, as it were. So that's another way of strengthening a submission. And we always encourage you to just be honest in your reflections about challenges and next steps, as well as celebrating the successes of what you've done. This really helps us to understand you're truly engaged with this as a sort of learning journey and as a developmental journey for teachers. I've got a bunch of other things we could say about the strength of submissions and what good evidence might look like. But let's deal with that in
that
questions.
Might come up in questions, I think.
Okay.
Also, David. So I suppose that's one thing to say. Thank you so much to everybody who submitted questions in advance. It's been incredibly helpful for us to get a sense of sort of like what you're wanting as part of this Q&A session. We had a number of questions about evidence and articulating impact and approaches to data and sort of structuring a statement of impact. And just initially, I'd like to say that these sort of themes and areas are explored in depth in our module 3. Where we focus specifically on evidencing change and impact and writing of impact. And we also have additional guidance that's on our Goldsmiths Artsmark teacher environment that you can register for. And of course, there's also a huge amount of resources on the Artsmark website itself. First up, it was a question that's come up from Rachel. And David, I was just wondering you could respond to this one. Rachel's asking, when you say embeddedness, what do you mean by that? Some things will only happen once. It may be an annual activity or an event. So sort of in terms of an embeddedness, what are you wanting to see then in evidence of impact for that?
The embeddedness factor, I suppose, is really, it goes back to the values and ethos point in terms of the 8 criteria. So it's the difference between something clearly having happened and something that happens with regularity and part of the way things are done around here, as it were. So it's the difference between a school that will have done something and then moved on to other things, and a school that, I'm not suggesting does amazing arts interventions or visits and rich cultural forms of practice day in, day out, but it is part of the DNA of the school. And I suppose the embeddedness idea is that there's a difference between schools who are working towards that and schools that already have that going on. So how that would be evident in a school would be a sense of not just confidence among teachers to have a go with the arts sort of week in, week out, having a go in primary schools, particularly at schools with the arts in a cross-curricular way, where the curriculum kind of lends itself to that. But also starting perhaps to explore the kind of pedagogies and affordances the arts can offer. So perhaps a more student-driven forms of learning, more exploratory forms of learning where the accent can be on creativity, perhaps rather than wholly on knowledge transfer and so forth. So
what would be, I suppose the other thing is also, it's like, it's what's then in terms of examples of best practice of evidencing of that impact of embeddedness. Could you share with us some examples that you've read in the SOIs?
Yeah, so generally it would be, well, let me think of a sort of, as rather than sort of one-off examples, more like a sort of generalized hypothetical. So you're working with a cultural partner, you might be doing some work on drama or performance or whatever it may be, and if you were working in an emergent way rather than an embedded way, you might work with a theatre company to come to your school and deliver a workshop that will be a fantastically rich experiential learning experience for young people. The feedback there would tend to be the children were really switched on, they loved it, they were clearly enlivened by it, they were enthused by it. All of that's great, and we love it and we celebrate it. If you were a school where arts practices were embedded, you probably would co-create that workshop with the theatre practitioner. Before they arrived, there would be more back and forth and briefing between you, because you would have a clearer sense of what you wanted to get out of it as a school. It would probably be slotting in with scheme of work or form of progression, a topic you were working on, or if you're in a secondary school, something in relation to the English curriculum or drama curriculum that you're working on. And you would be guiding it and steering it more, rather than it being something that was experiential and simply opening up to a learner to possibilities. It would be fitting in with something that you'd already structured, and you would be the co-author of that experience a bit more. And even more than that, if you were a platinum school, to characterize the same example, you might actually develop a scheme of work with that theatre company and be in a position where you could share that as CPD with other settings, and have co-created it with an external partner. Okay,
great. Thanks so much. Sam, we have a question from L. Longden in terms of, do the 8 criteria need to be covered in the statement of impact, or is it preferential to provide more detail, for example, on like prioritizing 4 criteria?
So the criteria will have equal weight. So they're not, one doesn't give you more than others. For example, we talked about quality assurance, about sending things to panel when it's atypical, when it's not clear. So if a school focused in just on, say, evidencing 4 criteria and there was no evidence in any other areas, I feel like it would be very difficult to give it a level, particularly if they were evidencing at silver, then you'd almost be like, well, there might be a no award. But that would go to panel and for discussion. And that's a point. We often have discussions at panel where we have schools that have got really amazing practice. David's example was just about drama. So they maybe have really amazing practice in drama, but they haven't mentioned the other art subjects. And actually, if you're working at gold level in one subject, but not any of the others, how is that ensuring an arts-rich child or arts-rich education for every child? What is the breadth of your curriculum? And when the arts are embedded, there is a breadth to the curriculum as well as the sort of points of depth. So I would never suggest that you just focus in on the 4 criteria. And the other thing I think you see with arts schools is that the criteria all are related to each other. You heard David how he groups this in 4 areas. Each criteria feeds itself. One of the conversations you often hear around the arts in schools more generally, not for arts, is the fact that the curriculum is very full already. It's hard to figure out how everything fits in together. when we see this working well, that stops being such an issue, because nothing is ever done just for one reason, and there's layered activities that deliver against a range of criteria. And just while I'm on that, just make sure that I'm clear about this, in terms of when you're evidencing, it's really helpful that you don't rely just on one example of activity. So, for example, I hope this isn't belaboring the point, but talking about this drama workshop, don't use that to evidence against all the criteria. What you want to be able to do is to say, we've done this thing, we're at this level, we're achieving this thing, and here are several examples of how we're doing it, and mentioning 2 or 3, and not using the same examples through the criteria. So sometimes at Silver it feels like there isn't as much activity going on because people are only talking about one event or one day or one project they've done on, and they refer to it several times. And schools at gold and platinum level, you can hear about a real range of activity, lots of different types of things across lots of different art subjects being talked about. So when you're evidencing, think about how you can mention not just belaboring one, although possibly I'm now belaboring the point itself, but that's the other thing I would pick up there. Sorry, that was several answers in one.
That's great. So David, we have a question and from Ken, and I'm going to sort of extrapolate it a little bit, but from what I understand, Ken, is if you haven't put something in your statement of commitment, can you still put it in your statement of impact?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the thing about Artsmark as it's designed now, and this refers back to the point I made about intentionality and impact and marrying them up. Sometimes you start out with a set of intentions and they change, or you either have a change of mind or a change of circumstance, and that's absolutely fine. So when you come to the statement of impact, if your actual journey has deviated from what you thought your planned journey would be, it's no problem at all. Briefly account for it, and if you did it because of your own intentions and you decided to take things in a different direction, so much the better, because that only adds to the intentionality in your narrative. But if you are blown off course by circumstance, staff changes, that's fine too, that happens. I don't shy away from talking about changes in your plans. It only enriches your narrative and it's real, and so we encourage you to be authentic. So absolutely fine. The only thing I would say is, if you drop things in that are new and fresh and don't bear any relation to your statement of commitment, and you do it in a way that's completely cold and doesn't relate one to the other document, then that can be a bit confusing for us as assessors. So if there is something new, do your best to just briefly write around it to alert us to the fact that this was a change of plan. That's all really. And, it's all to the good. We're completely sympathetic to changes of direction.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for everybody who joined us today, whether you asked a question or just listening or anything like that. We really hope that the sessions help to make the assessment process feel more transparent and supportive for you, and recognising that the real exciting and amazing work that Artsmark schools do, and you as individuals, teachers who are leading on that. If there's anything that you'd like us to follow up on or further reflect, please email us. We'll make a short summary of the sort of frequently asked questions, and we'll be able to share that with you. But have an amazing day, and thank you so much for everybody coming to the session.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.